All righty. It's Friday. Time for some API storytelling. Let me bring my friends in here and we'll get started. All
Hey,
right.
Ken.
Hey, Aiden. Welcome. Good to see you. Hope you survived the week.
I did. I'm on a little meditation thing right now, so it's super nice.
Very good. Let's get Mike in here. And there he is.
Hey,
Awesome.
how you doing, guys? Good to see
Good to see you.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Yeah, I'm feeling this one. It's been a busy one, but again, here we are looking forward to Friday. I'm just like, all right, this is the one point, kind of bright spot. I'm just gonna make it to that. I'm gonna get to that point, and then it'll all be good.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's why we do it.
So who'd we invite this week, Mike? Who do we got joining us?
So we're really, really lucky. Kevin Swiber is our guest today. I've known Kevin for several years. Just amazing things from Kevin, from all sorts of creative aspects. Developer, programmer, media type designer, great blogger and speaker. So I'm really excited that Kevin's able to come with us. They've got lots of really interesting stories to tell, and I really appreciate everything Kevin's done over all these years. So I'm just happy to have him here.
All right, I'm gonna bring him in here. Let me flick my switches here. See if we can't get. All right, there is Kevin. Hey,
there's Kevin. Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing absolutely great. The sun is shining. The COVID is still spreading, but there's a vaccine out there, I hear. So several of them, even one of them that doesn't work quite as well, but people are still excited about. I think that's great.
Listen, yeah, 100% is 100%. If I'm not in the hospital and I'm not in the grave, that's a winner for me.
Absolutely.
There we go. I'm playing with the different.
They said it was just yesterday was the anniversary of the WHO declaration. So we've been at this for a year now, and it's still the fastest vaccine development in history. So like I'm still shocked by it. Like reading all the stats and the history around how long this usually takes. Like we're all very fortunate. It's hard where we are right now, but we are fortunate to live when we are.
Definitely. Could be a lot worse. Definitely. So I'm happy.
Nah, I don't like that. We always say that could be a lot worse. Could be a lot better too.
It could be. It could have not happened this way at all, right?
We had the Spanish flu. We had like 100 years to prepare for this.
Yes, we did, and we had detailed plans. Best laid plans. Systems are complex, right? And people are part of the system, and you have to constantly upgrade and manage and modify and adapt on, in real time, and that's hard for us to do, I think.
So you look super relaxed. Did you say you've been on this meditation retreat?
Just a quick trip with two friends sitting on a pillow right now. We're just been meditating a lot every night after work, and it's been super refreshing.
Wow, that's awesome. I do the opposite. I have like planned anxiety freakouts every night. And it gets it out of my system. So, maybe there's a meditative quality to it, but certainly not the same.
Does scheduling make them more relaxing or less or more? Wait, what's the word I'm looking for? Does it add more anxiety, or does it make it easier on you to have these planned freakouts?
No, it is kind of like initially when starting my practice, there was a lot of performance anxiety working up to it. Like when the time comes, am I going to be able to freak out for a full hour, right? And now though, it's just a part of my natural everyday habit. It takes a while to form a habit, but I'm there. So every day, 5 o'clock, turn off the Zoom camera, go in my room, scream, cry, get it all out, do a little bit of journaling, and then I'm good to go.
There you go.
And is this the top of the mountain, or is there now another peak to climb?
Oh, I don't know. You're in meditation talk right now. It's like, I think it's the peak. And then it starts winding down a little bit.
So did I understand correctly, Kevin, that you have performance anxiety about anxiety?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. That's professional. That's definitely next level stuff. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I have several therapists. I keep them all very busy. So
You need a team.
it takes a village. Yeah.
It takes a village. Exactly right.
But do your therapists have therapists? I'm wondering. Just
They
to,
do.
like,
I actually asked them. Like, it's kind of like being an API designer by trade and then not actually designing any of your own APIs. You know what I mean? Like you have to be part of the practice. You can't be, as famous as, I don't know, Mike Abinson, let's say, and then not actually spend time designing your APIs, right? You got to do it. Same for therapists. Like you gotta really engage in the practice, I think.
Well, at least you're keeping people employed. You're doing great. You're contributing to society.
In this economy, you got to.
You got to. You're taking on the burden.
You've inspired me to hire 2 more.
Fantastic. Yeah. So what have you been doing, Kevin? What's going on? When you're not working on the anxiety thing, what else are you working on?
Oh, so I have transitioned my career a little bit, which I guess has been ongoing for my entire career. I'm always doing something a little bit different, I suppose. So now I am like technically involved with sales. I work at Postman, and I speak with folks who are starting their API journey, in the middle of their API journey, hitting problems in their API journey, and try to help them get over those humps and accomplish their goals. And of course, because I'm technically under sales, I of course incorporate Postman into those solutions. But when starting this job, I definitely said, like, I need to keep my integrity, right? Like, if there are other tools, even competitors out there that are going to solve this problem better, specifically for this particular, company, then I'm going to recommend them. And that's been going absolutely just fine. So I just got an award.
You got an award?
I did. Well, I got an award.
And this award is?
Hold on, it's
right, okay.
Look at this.
Look at this.
It's like invisible too, so it's like real tricky.
This is excellent.
It says above and beyond.
This would be right. This would be right. I mean, you talk about this like you're transitioning to, a new position or a new career thing. I mean, you have been transitioning a lot, right? You've done a lot of things, right? Quicken Loans, doing Postman, you've designed media types, you've been involved in lots of different organizations. What's the new transitions? Like, what is different? What is the same in all these things that you've been doing over all this time? I mean, what is the arc? What is the story here? Is there one? I mean, I don't know.
Is there an arc? Is the story? What's the same? There's a lot of questions in there. So what's the same?
There is.
People,
yeah.
like, people are just always the same. And the challenges that you get with people are always going to be there, just in different ways, right? And, I guess I focus on the challenge piece first, because, it's human beings are more complex than, the kind of systems that we program most of the time. Yeah. And having the skills to find out what is the healthy confrontation versus what is the unhealthy confrontation, meeting facilitation, basic meeting facilitation, making sure that folks have a voice, avoiding politics for the sake of politics. Like, these are present in early stage startups. These are present in, companies run by someone who might be the 10th wealthiest person in the world right now, which is true. Dan Gilbert, who runs Quicken Loans, just became the 10th wealthiest person in the world.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And it's pervasive. Companies all have the same kind of problems too, whether they're just starting or whether they're old. And they're the kind of problems that we deal with all the time, right? Like, how do we stay innovative? How do we start innovative? How do we have a good knowledge of our competition? How do we categorize our competition? How do we differentiate from our competition, right? So all these things are the same. And if you're not an old company who doesn't have concerns about being taken over by another company, then you will be taken over by another company, right? Like, it's just a matter of time. The sad fate is that the dinosaurs will die. And there's no stopping it. There's always another asteroid coming for your Earth. Which is why, again, I'm not selling these services, but I do recommend healthy anxiety practices every night.
Okay.
So you're just your career transitioning is you're just finding a new Earth before an asteroid hits the last one.
That's right. Yeah.
Just constantly hopping until.
Yeah, I've been hit a few times too. So
I think it's really interesting what you're describing as sort of these problems are real for people, and then also real for organizations, probably also for countries too. Like I find that like a lot of these like people problems are like very fractal, like the same kinds of things that, you know, block one from being innovative or kind or whatever thing we're trying to amplify in our life are also things that can like stop a corporation from doing that too, or a team or a group of people. So just it's really remarkable like how this sort of scales. And I'm curious, like have you seen that same kind of thing where like patterns in each individual life also exist in corporate life too?
You know, I have, so first off, I have this concept that I've been trying out, and it comes kind of from a place of privilege, but I'm trying to do this thing and have been for a number of years where I just consider my life as one life. And, you know, I have work as part of that. I have family as part of that. I have my own personal commitments. And this whole concept of work-life balance doesn't really make sense because I have one life, right? And this is actually a practice that I learned at Quicken Loans when I was involved in this group that interviewed all 600 people in IT to look for process improvements and, of course, focus on things like happiness, which was important to me and a couple of other hippie-esque folks that were on that team. So, yeah, so there are absolutely patterns, right? Like we, as human beings, we create these systems all around us. We create the governments, we create, organizations, we create, systems within those organizations. And all of the problems that we have as individuals make their way into every aspect of our lives, right? So, the same problems with conflict resolution that I have in my internal family system, I have in my work systems as well, right? And actually, the work side is a little bit easier because people are motivated by money, and people understand the politics around that, right? So it's interesting having children or having younger folks in my life that I have to interact with. Because they're not motivated by that, right? Like they're actually just speaking their truth the entire time. And it really kind of opened my eyes to how much we're probably concealing in these work-related meetings, right? Which is why I mentioned facilitation earlier. It's so important to make sure that basic things like we're calling on folks who are being silent to give them space and give them an option to express themselves safely, right? Because there's a chance they're not speaking up because they're afraid of something. Whereas my kids, they don't fear me at all. There's sometimes like I get really upset about it. I'm like,
how much cash have you offered them? How much cash have you? Because I mean, maybe you need to up the amount you're offering.
Maybe the motivations aren't quite there yet.
Like I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. Like, why don't you kids watch movies from that time and understand how you're supposed to fear your parents? Like this is not cool.
This is
sorry,
cool.
Mike. You were saying?
No. I was going to say I love that you actually kind of you've reminded me again. You know, everything we do is a choice, isn't it? It's a motivation, but it's a choice. The way we treat ourselves, the way we treat each other, the way we treat our work, the choice to make work and family life separate, to make them shared. All these things. These are all sort of choices we make. We're all kind of designing our own little mini system, right? We're designing our little part of it. And I remember this great line. I can't remember where it came from, but somebody was talking about, trying to change things. And the retort was like, what are you trying to do? Change the world? And the answer was, no, just my little part of it. We're in charge and we make choices all the time. And sometimes we forget that. I think we've talked about this before. It's actually a big responsibility to suddenly realize, oh no, I chose to say that. I may not have paid attention. It may have been out of habit, but that's my choice. I don't have to say that. I don't have to spend time here. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that. That's a huge responsibility. Maybe that's a major anxiety producer for me. Maybe that's what I'm really just saying right now. But I love that you talk about this idea of adopting this point of view that you have one life. I really appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks. It has its problems, right?
Yeah.
It has its problems, and I guess the amount of what we have choice over increases as our privilege increases, right? Like it's still an infinite amount, typically, even at the smallest amount, because you can keep going down. But right, for me to be able to say that I am going to try to split elements of my life according to the prioritization of that day or that moment or that week is a huge privilege. Because sometimes I'm a little bit of a workaholic. Sometimes, always have been, and sometimes I am spending a lot of time at work. Sometimes I have to, right? Sometimes it's going to be a 16-hour day for me at work. Probably never. I don't work that much anymore. Now that I'm almost 40, I don't work that much. It's going to be a 12-hour day for me. And sometimes, sorry, work, I've got to go spend the whole day in the forest with my kids because that's my priority, right? And it all balances out, right? The saying is it all comes out in the wash, I guess. But that is a huge privilege for me. Like so many folks, especially this day and age, aren't able to say, you know what, I can't go to work today because I have to go to the forest with my kids. The options are I have to go to work because every dollar counts and we're struggling right now and I get paid by the hour. So sorry.
Yeah. So I think you just sort of schooled me again. The choices we make sometimes are constrained, right? The weight that we have. I was taught early on that, for example, in a very, very mundane sort of way, every debt you have is a weight you carry, right? So you carry that around. So it was all about saving and all these other things. But some of us, are born with weightness, right? Some of us have weightness thrust upon them, right? So I didn't choose this. Somebody else chose this for me. It affected me. So now I have this weight that I have to carry. There are all sorts of things. We do have choices, but you remind me that a lot of people don't have the same range or the same quality of choices, right?
Yeah, and so interestingly, how this can start to come through on sort of the corporate side is that folks that I might be talking to, advising even on API strategy, advising on collaboration among teams in their environment. They're possibly just on a testing team. Their sphere of influence is what they can do in terms of testing. And they can try to have impact above on a bigger platform, story for their organization. But that's not really what they can control in that moment. Right? And this, it's interesting to see kind of those parallels and how that actually plays into businesses, into product vendors, right? I typically go to work for these companies that are trying some larger platform play. It is probably just a trend at the moment, right? Especially since we're taking all this money from investors, and I hope I don't get fired. But I'm taking all this money from investors through these startups, and they want a return on that investment. And to come in with a point solution a lot of times is going to be a much smaller total addressable market. It's going to be a much smaller amount of revenue stream that we're talking about. The profit margins are going to be small. Everything is smaller, right? And while that could be a good business, and maybe one day would have been a great small business to have, a rewarding small business to have, investors don't want small businesses, right? And it's tough because if you're interacting with those folks whose sphere of influence is smaller, you probably care, you probably want to help them out, you probably understand that they could have a better solution if it incorporated more of their organization, if it was driven by enterprise architecture or a VP of engineering, whatever. But you don't have a choice in that, right? And so your choice becomes, as a startup trying to sell software, do I sell to this one person who has the ability to buy, who has the ability to get advantages from what we have? Or do I say, sorry, there's nothing I can do until you can get me an audience with someone who has more power in your organization? And I think, for the last few startups I've been at, we continue to move towards the latter, which makes sense when your goal is to make a bunch of money selling platform solutions to big organizations. But it does have an impact on perhaps those folks who only have a small sphere of influence. It's a hard phrase to say. And you perhaps don't get that feel good dopamine hit by helping them out, and you have to say, sorry, go find your solution elsewhere.
Yeah, I get it. I definitely get it. Yeah.
Aiden, I'm wondering how that comes through for you. You're certainly in a startup that is a different startup than I'm at right now, and Ken. So I'm curious if any of that resonates with you, or if you have a different take on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was like, I have some thoughts on this. The parlay thing, like having to seek the audience, I thought that was a really good way that you framed it. And I think there's this general sort of like force in the world for these kinds of platform plays, as you describe them, because they have such sticking power. They're such bigger deals. If they work, they can be really powerful for an organization. But I think you're really onto something with this idea that all these long shots that we take, like these moonshots, a lot of them aren't going to work. And a lot of them aren't going to have the same kind of benefits. And I think the thing that founders in general really need to hold themselves to is to deliver value, principally, like first and foremost, and then to figure out how to collect on that value in some financial way secondarily. That's a platitude that I can just say out loud. I also try to live it. But I think ultimately, like, if you are going to do something that eventually scales up to an enterprise play, where you sell to someone that you need to seek an audience with and parlay and bring gifts and all these things, like you should make sure that you help the people along the way. And you might not be able to capture that value right away by giving out some of those free accounts. And it might seem like this weird disconnected thing where like you're never going to see anything from that. But I would argue that the more people inside these big companies you make happy, the more of these people you solve problems for, like in the long run, like being good to other people is going to win. And that might be like a story, which I was before, like all stories are wrong, some stories are useful. I believe that one, and I try to live by it. I don't know if it's empirically falsifiable or verifiable, but I think the intention is the important part of that. And I think trying to not get swept up in the founder storm and actually just help people is part of the reason why, like, I do meditation and talk to people and try to focus on the inner stuff, because I think that's where that can set you up. I hope, and I don't know for sure, but I hope it sets me up to help more people in the aggregate years from now as this all plays out.
And that's sometimes the best you can do, right? Like I don't like to associate sort of like good or bad to these things. They just are, right? They are just observations of things that are. You can get into the conversation of ethics and capitalism, but it doesn't go anywhere because sometimes they're fundamentally opposed to each other. So all you can do is your best, right? So I think that makes sense. Yeah. And again, like just to clarify, I'm not associating good or bad with any of these things. I think there are, some combination of good and bad things that are happening in every company. At the risk of being sued, you don't get to be the 10th wealthiest person in the world without having some gray area in your behavior, right?
For sure. Although I don't want to be on the record saying it. I don't have any data to back that up. I don't know much about the inside. I'd love to hear some stories though. I think one of the fascinating aspects of this is like, there's no reason why we can't raise the ship for everyone. Like there's no reason why we should think of these things as binary. I think a lot of the best ideas I've had and have heard from other people looked like like a binary choice, like we have to do it this way or that way, and here are the trade-offs. And like people can often find a way to get the best of both worlds. And there's this choose both thing that Ray Dalio says that has really stuck with me. Like there's often a way to find a way to get both of the things that you're looking for. Not always, but often.
Well, isn't this what our, I mean, we're in the business of binary and yeses and nos and computational thinking and approaching these. And I don't know if that's entirely compatible with capitalism, but it seems like capitalism's doing very well with chewing up the world with computational thought. But my wife, her favorite way to describe what I do for a living is I reduce things to transactions. That's my role is to do this. And it was the biggest eye-opening thing for me to realize, that's what I do, and I'm in the business of yeses and nos and reducing. And then how much of your anxiety, Kevin, would you say is from just your personal who you are and where you come from, and then this giant startup enterprise slip and slide that we're on, that you may not always be knowing which way the slip and slide's going? How much anxiety is about either side of the coin there?
Well, the bulk of my anxiety is thanks to my mother. So it doesn't really have to do necessarily with the industry and where we're going. It doesn't. I don't get heartburn worrying about where our future is going to go. Of course, I speculate constantly, and I make bets in terms of where I'm going to be employed, what I'm going to invest in terms of learning, who I'm going to try to include in my professional network. And that just sounds smart. I don't really do that very well, but except for you all, of course. We can always have anxiety about the industry and where we're going in the future. The truth is that nobody knows, right? Like even investors, they don't know. That's why they invest in tons of companies at the same time, right? They're trying to hedge their bets. And frankly, probably why they struggle to make sure that everyone is doing a full-on like giant play that's going to acquire the most amount of money, because really all they want to do is put their time into one thing that's really going to hit, right? But in the meantime, they'll put a little energy into everything. So I feel like we do that too on a different scale, unless y'all are rich and y'all are investing in a bunch of things. Maybe you are. I'm sorry, y'all haven't gotten rich off of API?
No, I'm still waiting. I'm waiting for the check. It's not happening yet. One of the things.
One big check. One oversized check.
One big check. I want that like styrofoam check, right? I want that big thing, man. It's got my name on it, lots of zeros on it.
I think they pay out every century.
Is that right? I just got to wait.
Yeah, well, this is like century. They're just saving it all up. But you get interest on it, though.
Get interest. We're in this like once in a century role here. We have all this once in a century shit going on. I want my once in a century check then. But no, let me to kind of take it back. One of the things that you said, Ken, which I get, and I struggle with, and this is sort of how I deal with it, is I also see that very often the kind of work that I do and the kind of stuff that I get engaged in, whether I'm writing about or speaking about, is often leading people to making choices, like to saying yes or no, or like deciding, or coming up with all these things. And I've spent a lot of time on this whole notion of decision making and how we make decisions and how we learn and how we sort of break these up into pieces. And rather than adopting the binary thing, I come from a kind of a different background. We've talked about this before. I have a couple of music degrees. I spent a decade or so traveling around playing. I have a sort of a different point of view, and everything is gray where I come from. Everything is a continuum. Everything is a stop along the way, and you can move. You can change where you are in that space. So I tend to rationalize to myself in my work that I'm trying to help people make a choice, not make decide what to do and what not to do, right? So you have lots of choices, and that's sort of what I tried to say before. But that sort of leads me to, and this is what I wanted to bring out, sort of leads me to something that Mel Conway mentioned, right? So we've talked about Mel Conway, Conway's Law, that kind of person. I was talking about something like this, about choices and decisions, and Mel kind of blew the whole thing out of the water. He said, you realize when you make a decision, you have just completely eradicated millions of options. Every time you decide, you've just removed a whole bunch of possibilities. And that's the way he thinks about it. Like, what possibilities am I about to remove? Man, that really kind of blows my mind.
Man, I could be deer in the headlights with that. Like,
right?
I'm not going to do anything, and give that to like my 18-year-old self. Like, I never have to do anything or commit to anything. I can just go and just
go.
Just go. Wow, that's deep.
I think sort of the flip side of that is constraints lead to progress, right? Like, I won't choose anything if I'm worried about the constraints it's going to offer. But if I do make that choice, what constraints come with that, and what opportunities, what possibilities branch off from that choice? Yeah. So, it's strange for me to turn anything into being more optimistic, just as who I am naturally as a person. But I think actually, like, my work in protocols has kind of influenced that. What do we do when we have more constraints? What does it actually offer us?
So what do you mean, like your work in protocols? Because I know you've designed a very popular media type. You posted it. I noticed it this week as well. Your Siren media type has more than 1,000 stargazers on GitHub. I did a quick look at other, and it's not scientific in any way, other formats that we commonly truck in. Nothing comes close to this. So you have this experience in this space. What is it about protocols or all these, programming protocols or formats or anything that have taught you something valuable about this idea?
Yeah, I mean, so it's, say we're going to build on top of TCP, right? There's already constraints that we're putting on there. Say we're building on top of HTTP. We've already got constraints that we're adding to there. We've got a client server protocol. Great. What can we do in this client server interchange, in this interaction, right? And then you start to think about things like state. Where is state going to get managed here? I've got a client, I've got a server. Where am I going to store that, right? And so you've got some options to go from there. Say you want it to be your protocol to be stateless, right? That's another constraint that you add on top of it. How do we make sure that state can not live over the wire, but live at one of the endpoints? And it really just all these options start to unfold. And then if you take that and then you start changing what, each end is going to be. So some of you might know I worked in IoT for a while. So what happens when the hardware itself is constrained? Not just the protocol, right? What happens if the state that I can store is actually really, really small? And then that gets into things like various formats. How do I actually store data? How does that impact the interactions that I'm having? So really, like, when we talk about making a decision and having that eliminate all the other alternatives, it's really this work in protocols that's given me the experience of saying, okay, I've made this decision. Now, not only what does it remove from the table, because that narrowing of the focus can be helpful, but what is it adding to the table that I didn't see before I made the decision?
Interesting. So it's like once you see the constraint, or you expose the constraint, or you select it, you're dealing with it. It gives you an opportunity to kind of look at what's reflected back, or what's the bounce back, or what's now available to me that maybe wasn't before. Now that I have this constraint, I think that's a line that I've heard attributed to a lot of different artists before. The most intimidating thing is a blank piece of paper, like with no constraints and no nothings. Why, that's super intimidating to be doing anything. Give me some box inside. I think the Eames couple, the chair designers, they had something like that as well. This notion that constraints are what get you started, kind of thing, and that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, get you started and continue to make progress, right? You see this in programming language design as well. If you start with that blank page, the options are endless, but then when you start applying constraints, I want a strongly typed system, or I want to make sure that this is super memory efficient. How do I design my interactions between these language components to allow that? It's everything just begins to build, right? Once you've got like a couple of bricks laid down, you have some kind of foundation to build on.
Ken, does that make sense? You've done a lot of this work too, right? You've been involved in all sorts of protocols and formats and decision making. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, and interestingly enough, I've had several attempts at quantifying my API journey, or some would say the API lifecycle, using an approach I called API journey, and it was used Siren to describe it and allow you to work your way and not just a linear lifecycle. I'm going to design, develop, and go down this road. I would pack it with all those choices, and you could, I'm designing. But then what your options are, you could go this way or this way based upon decisions you want to make. And I try to give you somewhat of a roadmap and some sort of constraints to help people ease them down through these steps. But I hadn't thought of it in terms of, like, I was just thinking as you're talking, I'm like trying to help people see the API lifecycle, because in the space, we all say API lifecycle. So what does that mean to different people? When if every person in the space you talk to, it means something different. So why is that? Oh, because we have a blank piece of paper, so how do I create some guardrails for people who maybe aren't from kind of our longevity in the space and kind of create our own guardrails? I use the transit analogy or subway analogy for this is, they need to be able to be given a map of New York City or the large place, but they actually need to go from here to here. So how do we give them some constraints to help them kind of in that journey and think through that? But I hadn't thought of that like in a constraint like that I was constraining. I thought I was building and giving, but yeah, I was kind of trying to create some guardrails for people to think about, for me to think about my journey, but then help others think about their own journey using kind of the guardrails or the constraints I put up using Siren from my own experience.
That's interesting. I never really thought about it that way though, but like hypermedia in itself is making a decision, is removing options from the table and opening new options once you've made that decision. That's fascinating.
And I've always thought of hypermedia, since we're sort of on this little thread, I've always thought of hypermedia like my job is to give people options. My role as a designer, like as a designer of a system or a designer of a type, is to say, you choose, you go ahead and you decide, what pillar to post you're going to travel in order to get to wherever you want to go. One of the lines I commonly use is, I spend my time designing things for people I've never met, I will never meet, to solve problems I have no idea exist, right? My job is to help people create game spaces, play spaces, so you set up like any cool game, right? Has constraints, has this set of rules. And the beauty is all the possibilities that now exist inside that set of rules, inside that game space. That's the way I think about designing computer systems, for the most part.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's interesting in like design thinking, there's a lot of frameworks where instead of starting with a wireframe or requirements, you actually start with constraints. And it's like a really interesting way to sort of start the conversation. So instead of saying we want a button that does this, it's like when a user has the intent that they want to create a new account, that can be created without them leaving this web page, and those sorts of things. And I think in a lot of ways, it's actually really, really a lot easier to talk about constraints than designing, because you can get so deep in like, should this button be over here? What should the flow look like? And if you can define all the constraints you want, you can actually get really far into the process of designing a full system without having to make all of these kind of exhausting incremental decisions along the way. So I think some of the hypermedia has always felt to me like one of those things that help constrain your own design. Your users will interact with your system as well. Like they're only, I mean, they could jump arbitrarily around, but they're only going to follow these sort of predefined paths. And we can learn sort of what paths people do follow by looking at where they came from and what links they followed down. So there's like, there's something really interesting there. But I think complex systems in general can be defined by the constraints, and that can help you get really far in the process. And as you add more constraints, you almost like create focus. Like you say, like, now I can look at this thing that was a mess and I can take away all the pieces that like aren't going to be possible because of this constraint. And what I see that's left is much more limited, and I can think about that more clearly. So sometimes you need to throw out a few constraints and just start from scratch every time. But like there's interesting processes here, and like we're not the first people to be talking about this.
Yeah.
So talk to me about the relationship between those constraints and like the affordances that hypermedia and the web bring. Like those are just constraints, right? Those things, like we're just building on the past, the constraints put in place from every RFC back to 1969, right? To a certain degree. And then we're just kind of, do we get to throw away? I guess we're not throwing away with that. Or there's a process for throwing away that. Sorry, I'm going down a whole other path now. I'm going to get lost. I take that back.
And now, I mean, I think that's a great point. Like, how does the concept of an affordance tie into the constraints of where you're at? And an affordance is really your permission slip and what you can do next, right? It's really showing you the path there for that next decision that you need to make. So I think there is a link there. Absolutely. Affordance is the tool you use to get to the next decision that you're making, the next constraint. Right.
And I often think of, again, to use this analogy of game space and gameplay, which I use so frequently, is you can unlock affordances. You sort of, if the state of things is in a certain place, if I've sort of saved this bit of information and committed this particular action, then the door opens. Oh, wow, cool. Now I can go in here. Now I can do this work. So those affordances are, to me, they're portals, they're gateways, they're keys, they're opportunities, sort of like what you're saying, Kevin, in the sense that they're options that you have. They sort of lead you to something along the way. And some places are affordance rich, and some places are, a sort of an affordance desert, right? Like I don't have a lot of options here, or I have to carry an awful lot in order to understand what's going on. So I tend to think about it in terms of how much I want to embed in an environment, and how much I want people to sort of bring to the table or carry with them, sort of on their own. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, Kevin.
Yeah. I'm curious how this might come through teaching as well. I know, Mike, I think you give a lot of trainings, around APIs. I know. So, back in my Apogee days, I got to work with Brian Malloy, who, by the way, is an amazing storyteller.
Yes.
Of course, I think the stories he's telling nowadays is real estate in Detroit, which is great for him.
Right.
Excited for him for that.
Yep.
But his thing was always, and Apogee at the time, the kind of content that we were putting out was very prescriptive, right? By design, because it's certainly easier. My natural state is to be like, you have option 1, 2, 3, and 4. Why you might want to choose option 1 is dissertation. Why you might want to choose option 2 is dissertation, right? And nothing's ever bad or wrong. I also apply this to all sorts of things in my life, right? Like I don't think there's a certain food that's bad or good, right? I don't think there's a certain architectural style that's bad or good. There's no moral judgment on these things. But Brian's pattern was always, through this series of videos that was super popular with Apogee, was to present 3 different ways of doing things: A, B, and C. Right? It gives you sort of, as the viewer, the consumer of that teaching. Okay, great. I have multiple choice here that I get to choose in my life when I design my API. And then Brian, of course, would always say, "Here's why you choose option B." Right? And so it was very prescriptive. It was very like, here are some options that are going to be available to you when you go on this journey. Here's why you want to choose this one. Here's why you want to follow that signpost. and then map out, the whole API design this way. Super successful series. Flew right in the face of everything we were saying about hypermedia, but that's okay. Still got people interested in API design, still got people building APIs. Fantastic. I'm wondering, Mike, like, I don't know if you employ that kind of style, but this whole, like, being prescriptive on choosing your constraints, does that come through in teaching for you?
It's really interesting you mentioned this on so many different levels. First of all, I think, was it through Detroit Apogee? Is that when we first met in person? Was it in Detroit? So. I think it was. Now that you're telling me this story, I remember this so clearly. I will say, very similar to what I think I was hearing you saying, I definitely suffer from the, no, it's okay if you want to do something else. Let me give you the whole story on why that something else is really cool. And that does not always serve me well when I'm trying to teach, right? People are like, well, just come on, just tell me, like, which one? It's like, well, let me get Malloy in here. But so I definitely deal with that. And in fact, to be really transparent here for a second, sometimes I will write an article or give a talk where I'm super prescriptive, and I just simply say, this is what we're going to do, and this is why you should do it. Here we go. And I will tell you that that's not my typical style. If anybody sees me, I'm usually, this has got lots of options, this has got lots of possibilities, and here's the history of where it came from. I get a very different reaction from those prescriptive talks. And I get one of two actions, usually both. Somebody who says, I'm glad somebody finally told me how to do this. And the other one is, man, you're so wrong, I can't believe it. Right? and
they're both right. Right?
Yes,
they're both
that's
right.
correct. I was going to say, yes. And what really bugs me is I have to say, I typically, my brain, to the person who says, man, you're really wrong, I'm typically saying yes. And to the person who says, I'm glad you finally told me how to do it, I want to say, hold on, wait a minute. There are other, and I go, so this is my this is my visceral reaction to these things. That's sort of like my take on these things. I definitely suffer from that notion where I want to keep giving people rope. I want to keep giving people options. But you know what? I didn't do that. There are lots of cases where that doesn't make sense. You don't just, give people the keys to the kingdom and say, yeah, I'm not going to tell you anything, give you no advice. Go ahead, go nuts. You don't do that, right? You have to have constraints. You have to do that.
What I hear, Mike, which is really interesting, is when you want to say no to the folks who say yes, and yes to people who say no, I think like the summation beneath that is like you're very nuanced. Like you went through and you thought you understand all the different constraints constraints. And I think when people come into the situation, like what's different between the people who say yes and the people who say no, they probably have a constraint from their company or the legacy or their knowledge or whatever they're bringing to it that makes the thing you're proposing not part of the acceptable realm. And it's not about you or how you frame it. And I think the way you can get like both parties into the same place is that nuanced conversation. But like if you have 20 minutes at a conference, it's really hard to do that. And that's why like Twitter and social media and even blogging, like it's really hard to get the nuance out there to help people make a decision on their own. And I think the competing view is like you just say someone in the market is talking about all the different ways to do it and being very prescriptive, and the people will sort of line that up and someone is aligned with their constraints, and that'll be the ones that they prefer. And like it's not to say either one is wrong, but I think that's probably like the underlying mechanic of what you're saying. That'd be my take on it.
So just to flip it around, do you deal with this? I mean, you're involved in a whole product journey, right? Do you deal with this same kind of thing as well, where you get the sort of, this is perfect, this is terrible? And I mean, is this sound the same or not? Is this what you deal with?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a daily thing, like calls before this, calls after this. And what's really interesting, and this is the time that I talk about in between to get off my chest. There's different people who are coming at it from different angles, who have different sets of problems. And at the end of the day, like Kevin was talking about, there's different teams with different motivations too, and different constraints as well. So at the end, you know, we try to step back and like talk about like the one thing that matters to everyone, and then try to create conversations around how to get there. And I think a lot of the time, like that can bring the right constituents into the room. But yeah, sometimes we have people who are like very much like all the way gung ho, and I'm like, well, let's talk about the nuance a little bit. Like, let's get into some of the details. And then all the time, someone's not all about it, and then later, you know, we have another meeting and like they've already set everything up on their own, and it's like, what changed? Like, I don't get to see that interim period where everything changed for them. But yeah, I'd say we focus on just trying to solve the problems, like, and that is hopefully something that there is some persuasion in that, but we try to bring it from the place of like, you've all agreed this is a common problem. Let's figure out like how to take what's there today and get to that solution.
I was going to say the problem becomes the shared understanding, right? Yeah,
and people will say all sorts of, like, sometimes developer teams think that the QA team is the problem. Sometimes the QA team thinks they're the problem. Sometimes even the same developers on the same team think that each other are the problem, or the language they chose, or some decision they made 5 years ago. And a lot of the time, those things are symptoms or components of the problem, but they're not the entire problem. And I think like getting that zoom out is like the hardest thing to do.
Kevin, is that what you really meant? Like early on, you were talking about this ability to facilitate. Is that coming close to the kind of thing you're thinking of?
To a certain degree, right? And again, like you can go like real macro, real micro with these things too. You know, I think Aidan mentioned there's like a lot of self-similarity through the whole picture. What's fascinating to me is, so I'm just going to start out by saying I'm a terrible storyteller. Awful, right? Awful. I'm like, here
not
are
true,
the
but
facts.
go ahead.
Click, 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 click. Slide 3. Click, click. But like the concept of storytelling is so important, even in this case where, you know, perhaps we're doing a retrospective as to why things have failed. Why are things in the state they are today? You know, being able to have that real discussion of, you know, and it probably shouldn't be in terms of is it the QA team's fault or is it the front end dev team's fault? But, you know, what actions, what decisions led to where we are today? That sort of storytelling is super important. And I think we're starting to see that even through the technology that's coming out, with observability being something that has gone from nice to have, or maybe just being like some basic monitoring and logging, to being like the basis of how we need to make decisions to run our business today. That is a huge indication of how storytelling is becoming important for making decisions. And of course, we can see that in systems we control very easily, like software. I say easily, but, you know, relatively easy compared to the systems of human interaction.
Well, I think if more of our days are in Slack, in GitHub comments, and at Postman, we're trying to define, I think, what is the next generation of collaboration and evolution, where observability on the communication is going to, I think, and on the change. And I know Aidan really speaks to this world as far as, you know, I've mentioned it before and I'll keep mentioning it. I see Aidan building the story core of APIs. It's capturing the exhaust from the existing outputs and then trying to map it to what people think the coherent story or the story is, but realize actually showing us like your perspective of what just happened was not true, because look, there's actually 5 more parameters and there's all these other endpoints that's being used. Your view is actually a pretty limited one. And so being able to capture those stories and then retell those stories, I think, from the existing outputs and exhaust from our operations, that's the only way we're going to stay in tune with the humans at scale. Because I know I'm feeling like this at Postman right now. We're growing so fast. I don't know what's being said. You know, like, how do I know? How do I stay in alignment? Let alone how do I lead and say, let's go over there. Let's do this. You know, I need more feedback loops, and I don't know how to do it at scale.
There's a whole other class of tooling that's like doing observability for these teams. Like if you think about how we communicate today, it's like video and messages and email. And those are the protocols, but like the framework of the conversation, the way we have these things, where we write them down, how we decide to change, you know, a perspective that we as a group have adopted, like that whole protocol is like culture. Like that's the thing that like exists outside of all these mediums. So I think a lot of times like we focus on sort of the messages because that's what we can see and measure, but there is all this other stuff like you're saying, Ken, that's like completely outside of the machine. That is this human part of the interaction.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's the orgs we're building. So Kevin, where are you most comfortable? A startup, small, enterprise, mid-size? What's your Goldilocks kind of sweet spot?
I like the smaller spaces. Honestly, I like working for startups. And I guess I didn't realize this until after I had worked at Apogee for a while. And you know, for a while was kind of over some skunkworks stuff we were doing there. And then eventually, you know, launched this whole IoT product over there. And through that, you know, I was, you know, technically an engineering manager at that point, but we owned everything, right? We acted as kind of a smaller startup with inside that company for a number of various reasons. And we were given the ability to do things like handle some marketing stuff on our own. We certainly worked with some amazing marketing people at Apogee to help us out. But, you know, we were developing content there. We were doing training sessions. We were doing stuff that you would typically see DevRel folks do today, except we were also building the platform, right? So having the ability to work across marketing and sales and support and engineering and product development, like it was such a great experience for me that, you know, when Apogee went to Google, it was kind of a big no for me. It was kind of like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not going to Google. Not after like giving me a taste of being able to work, you know, across all these functions and knowing that I'm going to be put on a very narrow, specific thing at Google. That's not what I want. So I went through a whole, you know, crisis, a whole, you know, feeling of breakup after Apogee, which in
Oh no!
Oh, no.
We lost him.
He said breakup of Apogee and then he disappeared. What did they do?
Oh, which in retro, yeah, the punchline was coming. Here he is, coming back. There he's back. Hey,
what was that?
I didn't do it. I swear.
We thought Apogee came for you. You disappeared right after you said it.
I shouldn't have said anything about the 10th wealthiest person in the world. A very kind person. Anyway, you know, the good thing that came out of me departing Apogee was this realization that I will not stop working cross-function no matter what my role was going to be at any company. And so I need to work at a company that is going to allow that kind of flexibility for me if I'm going to be happy where I'm at. So you know, I worked some API serverless startups for a while, went into consulting, which was also really good because I almost started my own IoT company. Then I consulted for an IoT company and I was like, absolutely not. All the big players are taking this industry right now and all the little folks are just going by the wayside. So for me at that time, no way. And then I went to work for like Node.js APM tooling. So Node.js and APIs have kind of been in my wheelhouse for like a decade. And, you know, and that was super fascinating. And then, you know, I ran into Ken at a conference, you know, I think it was API Specs 2019, where, you know, they were like, oh, you know, Kevin was popular briefly in 2012. Let's invite him out. Let's invite them out and we'll put them on stage for a little while. So, you know, that was fantastic. I met Aiden there, I believe, for the first time. And Joyce from Postman, and it was such like a really it was really changed. It really changed me at that point. It really got me excited about the API space again, which I was kind of burnt out on for a long time. So, yeah, so happy to be at Postman. My title is Lead Solutions Engineer, but I get involved in everything I can, and we'll keep doing that until they tell me not to.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, I'm thoroughly enjoying collaborating and plotting and scheming with you on this stuff. Well, with that said, I think we've hit our hour. But I, thank you, Kevin, for joining us. I appreciate your time today, and we look forward to having you back in the future. We don't know where this is going, but we're having fun. So,
well, it was a blast. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, great to see you too.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yep.
Great to see you. Have a great way.
Bye, Kevin.
Bye-bye.
Well, thanks, you guys. That was another good session. I think we've got some more fun planned for next week, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
Somewhere we got a spreadsheet that tracks all this because
that's right. Exactly right.
As we go into the weekend here. But anyways, I'm going to say goodbye to Aiden first because I let him on first. And enjoy your weekend, sir.
Thanks so much, guys. See you,
Aiden. Talk to you later.
All righty, Mike.
Right,
enjoy your weekend. Get some rest.
You too. You take care of yourself.
All righty. And we'll be back at it next week.
See you next week.
Have a good weekend.
Hey.